Greetings friends, and welcome back once again to the Creation Soapbox, brought to you by your friends here at abitoforange.com. Today we're going to look at natural selection. But before we look into Darwin's book, let's look at the cover of his book. The title of Darwin's book was On Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. It's a lot of words, Chuck. Most of us know it just as Origin of Species. The origin of species by means of natural selection. Now, I don't want to be putting words in Chuck D's mouth, but I think that when he said the origin of species by means of natural selection, what he meant was he thought that natural selection was the means by which species originate. But is that even possible? Let's find out. Welcome to evolutionary mechanism number 1, natural selection. Let's take a look at how natural selection works, with a very popular example, the peppered moths. Variation in traits can affect survival ability. So, for instance, in this particular environment, one of them is easier to spot than the other and is more likely to get eaten. So the peppered moths come in these two different flavors, light and dark. On dark trees, the dark moth will be harder for the predators to spot. Or on light trees, the light moth will be harder for the predators to spot. So here's the story from the Industrial Revolution. It is told that the trees were primarily light in color, and so the lighter colored moths had an easier time hiding on the branches of these trees. But then the Industrial Revolution occurred, factories made smoke, the smoke darkened the trees, the darker moths now had the survival advantage. The lighter moths now were easier to find, and the population changed from primarily light-colored moths to now primarily dark-colored moths. Both still existed, but the percentages changed. The percentage between the two were guesstimated to be somewhere around 95% white moths and 5% black moths before the Industrial Revolution. Then after this change, when the trees got darkened by soot, those numbers just switched, where now 95% of the population were black moths and 5% of the population were white. One possible outcome of this is that one of the variations will just go away. The birds will eat all of the light-colored moths until none are left, and so you would have started off with two variations of moth, but one of them would have been eaten to extinction to the point where the peppered moth was just the black variation. So what natural selection could do to the peppered moths is over time the light moths could go extinct, its genes lost from the population entirely. Only the dark ones would remain, so instead of coming in two flavors, the peppered moths would only come in one. This is how natural selection works. You have a variation in the population, there's some kind of environmental stressor, whether it's disease or a change in temperature or introduction of a predator, something that makes one variation capable of surviving better than the other. So it is naturally selected to survive because of its benefits, or it's naturally selected to die because it lacks the benefits it needs to survive. But let's see. According to Berkeley, natural selection can produce amazing adaptations. But according to Berkeley, natural selection cannot try to supply what an organism needs. Natural selection just selects among whatever variations exist in the population. So we're being told that natural selection both produces amazing adaptations and that it doesn't produce anything. Natural selection just selects among whatever variations already exist in the population. What? Here's another metaphor I call colorblind hunters. Something which affects survival is called an environmental stressor. It can be predators, a disease, the availability of food, a change in the climate, etc. So imagine a population of ducks. They come in yellow, green, red, and blue. Now, these are colorblind hunters. They can't see the color red, which to them makes the red duck virtually invisible. That means the red duck has a survival advantage and is more fit in this environment. Because their environmental stressor is these hunters, and because the hunters can't see the red ones, that duck is more fit to survive in this environment. Given enough time to go to a sort of logical extreme, all of the ducks would have been hunted to extinction except the red ones. Only the red ducks could survive and reproduce, which means the population has changed because of natural selection. The population of ducks no longer has the genes for yellow or blue or green. All of the ducks are now red because those that carried the genes for other colors have been killed and eaten. Is this evolution? Did the population gain any new genes? Well, no, they had the genes for red, yellow, and blue, and now they don't. Do the ducks now have any physical features or behaviors which they did not previously have? Well, no, the red ducks were there to start with. Natural selection has removed 75% of the genes for color from the population. Nothing has been added. Now here's a real-life example of this. So antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Bacteria of any particular species will have variations in it because bacteria are programmed to sort of mess with their own DNA and to create slight variations within their own species. So in any population, there's going to be some that, because of a particular change in their physiology, is unable to take in or process antibiotic drugs, and therefore they are resistant to antibiotics. They can't take it in, so it can't kill them. So if this population receives an antibiotic, that one variation that can't take in or can't process the antibiotic will survive. All the others will die, and that antibiotic-resistant bacteria now becomes the primary strain in this particular location. But no new bacteria have been created. The antibiotic-resistant bacteria was already there to start with. So take your deck of cards and toss out any card which is not in the heart suite. Shuffle, deal, and if you find a card that's not a heart, just toss it out. Did that for 4.5 billion years. Will this create the Archduke of Hearts? No. Natural selection removes variation from a species. It removes variation from a population, but that doesn't create any new things. Natural selection is a subtractive process. So, just as an example, you can't take a Honda Odyssey, remove some parts, and create the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. If it was possible to create the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile just by removing parts from a Honda Odyssey, I would have bought a Honda Odyssey. But you can't do it. In order to create the next step in automotive perfection, you have to add new parts that are not part of the original car. So the question is, does natural selection add branches to the tree? Does removing existing genes from a population add new genes to the population? Does cutting branches add branches? No. Very simply, subtracting doesn't add. Natural selection is a subtracting process. It's an editor. It removes branches, it removes variation, it removes existing genes. It does not create any new ones. That's called math. Sorry, Chuck D. Evolution has failed. Or at least the title of your book has. Now, Charles Darwin probably didn't know or understand this when he titled his book, Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. But at the 6th edition of his book, he added a few paragraphs which showed that he clearly understood that what I've just told you is the truth. He said this in Origin of Species of the 6th edition. This preservation of favorable individual differences and variations, and the destruction of those which are injurious, I have called natural selection, or survival of the fittest. Some have even imagined that natural selection induces variability, whereas it implies only the preservation of such variations as arise and are beneficial to the being under its conditions of life. So Chuck D to English, what he's saying is, natural selection doesn't make new variations. It just preserves those that are beneficial and destroys those which are harmful. Thus, Charles Darwin knew that natural selection could not be the origin of any species. Natural selection cannot be the means by which any species originate. And he didn't know that when he wrote the title, but when he made the 6th edition of the book and continued to call it Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, he should have known better. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. He should have maybe changed the title a little. Come on, Uncle Chuck. We just want you to be honest. Is that too much to ask? Well, I hope you've learned a bit about natural selection and Charles Chuck D. Darwin himself. Next time, we're going to look at more evolutionary mechanisms and see if they can make the Darwinian tree of life grow. I hope you enjoyed this Bit of Orange. Join us again next time, or check out more of what we have to offer at abitoforange.com. And remember, Jesus loves you.